Could you tell us a little more about the kicker? You mentioned that a minute ago, but how he was found, and then a question for Kevin. If you could follow up, just explain in layman's terms a little about the salary cap and how it works. Thanks.
You get the hard question. It's interesting with kickers, and that's one of the hardest probably positions to scout, and because there's a lot of them, and it's like going to find a golfer. And I always, what'll generally happen is when you set out to maybe find a kicker, that's when you do your best scouting. And you make it a priority to go find someone, and that's what happened in this case, and then what you do really is once you and Jeff, he alluded to the fact we worked him out a couple of times. He wasn't a combine kicker, did do an all-star game, but when you did the first time, we narrowed it down to 2 guys that we thought we would draft. So we went out a second time to check out the onside kicks, but also to tell those kickers, you know what, here we go. We're going to come to you a second time. And this was probably 3-4 days before the draft, maybe 3. And we basically let those guys know, hey, we're coming to check you out, 3 days before. So that gives them a little bit of pressure. And with a small school guy like this guy, you wanted to see could he handle the pressure, and he did every time. And so we crossed our fingers and got him in the 5th.
I think the Zerline story is a great lead into how you handle the salary cap. Salary cap this year is $120 million. Next year it'll be $121, and that's a hard cap. It's not like any of the other sports. I mean, you can't really spend any more than that. And there are some ways you can spend more than the cap, but it's a credit card. If you don't pay for it now, you're going to pay for it later. There is no way that you can ever spend money that doesn't count against the cap. And it's a constant balance of trying to figure out how you get the best team on your roster. And I always say our job for Les, for Jeff and I, is to try to replicate the way we pay players, the way the locker room would. If you sat down in the middle of the locker room on Friday and said, look, you 53 guys made it, here's $120 million, you guys divide it up how you see fit. That's how you'd like your team to be set up, because that's how you avoid problems on your roster, because the players know who can play. And they know they can look around the locker room. They know who's paid well, who's not paid well, who's of value, and who's not. And the truth of the matter is, as much as I'd like to tell you, is there are only 2 types of players in the NFL, overpaid and underpaid. There aren't a lot of guys you look at and you say, wow, that's exactly a $2.5 million player. You have some guys like James Ornice who make $600,000 this year. They're tremendous values. You have some guys who are just, you made a mistake when you paid him. Jason Brown was never worth what we paid him. But you hope overall that balances out. But really, you try to line it up in your locker room. So when you look at your payroll, your guys 1 through 53 are pretty much stacked the way you think the players would stack them, the way they're ranked. That's when you know you're doing your job, because it prevents problems in the locker room. It gets people motivated, and then you can always adjust. Our biggest philosophy here is make sure that you have flexibility. Things change. People will say, oh, you want to go out and sign a 5-year contract. Well, I promise you, a guy, Scott Linehan, signed to a 5-year contract, in 2007, had no idea that they would play for 4 different head coaches who would all have different schemes, who would all have different philosophies, different wants. So to me, when you're sitting there and you're trying to assess value long term, you want to give your coaches, your GMs, always the ability to get in and out of players as quickly as possible, because things change in the NFL. Things change rapidly, and the teams that have the greatest flexibility usually are the best teams. Now, if you go through what Les and Jeff are doing, getting a young team, youngest team in the NFL, developing that, once you've seen those guys grow and you know them, you've got stability, then you reward them, you try to keep them here. And I think the biggest mistake the Rams made in the greatest show of turf is that group should have been together for 8-9 years. It was too small of a window for the talent they had, and as silly as it sounds, for the success that you want this franchise to have, we're already looking at 2016, 2017, how you fit all of these young guys into the salary cap then, because you want your window to stay open as long as possible.